The email arrived in Marcus Carter's inbox at precisely 4:47 p.m. The sender? The Morning Exchange, one of the highest-rated talk shows in the country. The message was brief, professional, and seemingly innocuous. "We'd love to invite you as a guest for an upcoming segment on diversity in business. Please let us know your availability." Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the words on his screen. He had seen this play before. Every so often, mainstream media decided to highlight black entrepreneurs, berating them for applause before swiftly moving on to the next trending topic. But something about this invitation felt different. His company, Next Tech, wasn't just another tech startup. It was a powerhouse. They had just secured a $200 million government defense contract, outbidding some of the most powerful corporations in Silicon Valley. It was a deal that had taken years of relentless work, late nights, and sacrifices, not some diversity quota handout. That's why this email unsettled him. Across the room, his assistant, Vanessa Green, noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" Marcus hesitated, then turned his laptop screen toward her. "The Morning Exchange," she read aloud. Then, her face darkened. "Are you sure about this? These shows. They love a success story, but they love tearing one down even more." Marcus exhaled. He knew she was right. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You've worked too damn hard for this. Don't let them use you as a soundbite. If you think Marcus should go through with the interview, drop a 1 in the comments. If you think he should turn it down, drop a 0. And if you're not sure, hit that subscribe button to see what happens next." He rubbed his temples, thinking. Was this a real opportunity, a chance to set the record straight, or just another media circus waiting to ambush him? But then, he straightened his shoulders. "If they think I'm just another easy target," he said, voice steady, "they're in for a surprise." The morning of the interview, Marcus Carter arrived at KXNT Studios in Los Angeles, greeted not by warmth or excitement, but by nicey, transactional efficiency. A young producer, barely looking up from her clipboard, gestured toward him. "Mr. Carter, thanks for being here. We'll mic you up in 5. No small talk. No introductions. Just another task on their to-do list." Inside the sterile green room, an assistant applied powder to his face with robotic indifference. The studio monitor flickered in front of him, displaying the show's current segment, a celebrity scandal, followed by a light-hearted cooking demo. Then, a transition card flashed across the screen. Coming up next, the black tech boom, talent or special privilege? Marcus clenched his jaw. So this was the angle. He had expected them to take the diversity success story route, but this was a loaded gun disguised as a discussion. Before we dive deeper into what happens next, don't forget to hit that like button if you're loving this story, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. He glanced at Vanessa, who had accompanied him to the studio. She was scrolling on her phone but had clearly seen the same screen. Without looking up, she muttered under her breath, "I knew it. They're setting you up." Marcus exhaled. If they thought they had the upper hand, they were mistaken. Minutes later, he was led to the brightly lit set. The stage design was meant to feel inviting, soft blues and golds, a sleek glass coffee table separating him from Jessica Monroe, the show's lead anchor. Jessica was a seasoned journalist, known for her polished demeanor and ability to dismantle guests with a smile. Before we continue, what do you think will happen next? Will Marcus shut them down or fall into their trap? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe to RVM Black Struggles for more powerful stories like this. A young producer, barely looking up from her clipboard, gestured toward him. "Mr. Carter, thanks for being here. We'll mic you up in 5. No small talk. No introductions. Just another task on their to-do list." Inside the sterile green room, an assistant applied powder to his face with robotic indifference. The studio monitor flickered in front of him, displaying the show's current segment, a celebrity scandal, followed by a light-hearted cooking demo. Then, a transition card flashed across the screen. Coming up next, the black tech boom, talent or special privilege? Marcus clenched his jaw. So this was the angle. He had expected them to take the diversity success story route, but this was a loaded gun disguised as a discussion. He glanced at Vanessa, who had accompanied him to the studio. She was scrolling on her phone but had clearly seen the same screen. Without looking up, she muttered under her breath, "I knew it. They're setting you up." Marcus exhaled. If they thought they had the upper hand, they were mistaken. Minutes later, he was led to the brightly lit set. The stage design was meant to feel inviting, soft blues and golds, a sleek glass coffee table separating him from Jessica Monroe, the show's lead anchor. She was a seasoned journalist, known for her polished demeanor and ability to dismantle guests with a smile. "Marcus Carter," she greeted, flashing a practiced grin. "CEO of Next Tech. A true American success story." Marcus nodded, measured. "I appreciate the invitation." She leaned in slightly, flipping through her cue cards. "Let's jump right in," she said. "Your company recently landed a $200 million government contract, beating out some of the biggest names in the industry. That's quite impressive." Marcus knew this game. Build him up first. Make it seem like they respected his achievements. He gave a diplomatic response. "It was a long process. We put in the work, developed an encryption security system that outperformed the competition. Simple as that." Jessica crossed her legs. Her smile didn't waver. "Some have called your innovation groundbreaking," she said smoothly. "But others have raised questions." Marcus didn't flinch. "Questions?" Jessica picked up one of her cards and read aloud, her tone deceptively neutral. "Industry experts say Next Tech may have benefited from federal diversity incentives, that companies like yours have an edge in government contracts because agencies want to diversify their vendors. That perhaps, this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota." There it was. The real reason he was here. A carefully orchestrated hit job, disguised as a conversation. Marcus let a beat pass before he responded. Then, with the calm precision of a chess player, he placed his first move. "I've heard that argument before," he said. "It's funny though, when a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when a legacy firm, owned by the same families for generations, lands the same deal, no one questions it." The energy in the studio shifted. Off camera, producers exchanged glances. Jessica, to her credit, didn't blink. "So you're saying race played no role at all in your success?" she asked, tilting her head. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Let me ask you this, Jessica." The moment he said her name, she stiffened ever so slightly. "When SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota?" Jessica blinked. "When Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin landed government deals, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me?" Jessica opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Marcus continued. The game had officially begun. Jessica Monroe's polished exterior never cracked, but Marcus saw the flicker in her eyes, a moment of hesitation. She had expected him to defend himself, not go on the offensive. But Jessica Monroe was a professional. She recovered quickly. "Well, Marcus," she said smoothly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, "let's talk about that playing field you mentioned." A shift in tone. A shift in strategy. "You grew up in Detroit, single mother, public schools, no Ivy League connections," she continued. "Yet somehow, you went from a struggling neighborhood to securing contracts that billion-dollar corporations couldn't land." Jessica let the question hang in the air. The implication was clear. "How did you get here? Did someone pull strings for you?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, pretending to consider his words. He had heard this before. It wasn't curiosity. It was an accusation wrapped in admiration. A setup disguised as a compliment. "It's called work, Jessica," he said, his voice even. "Some of us don't have generational wealth or country club networks to fall back on. So we build from the ground up." Jessica wasn't done. "But surely you had help along the way," she pressed. "Maybe a mentor? A program? Something that gave you an extra push?" Marcus let out a slow exhale. "Yeah. Help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first software prototype because I couldn't afford rent." Silence. Jessica's lips tightened for a fraction of a second. Behind the cameras, producers stood frozen. This wasn't the way the segment was supposed to go. Jessica shuffled her cue cards. "And yet," she continued, regaining her rhythm, "some would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives exist specifically to open doors that weren't open decades ago." Marcus leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. He was done playing polite. "You know what's funny?" he asked. Jessica gave a small, calculated smile, signaling that she thought she was back in control. "What's that?" Marcus's eyes never left hers. "When a black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us. But nobody asks which old money bank funded a white-owned startup." The studio went dead silent. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford. Or which golf buddy invested in their company. Jessica blinked, but held her composure. Marcus let it sink in before delivering the next blow. The truth is, success isn't handed out in some lottery. People like me have to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table. A shift in the air. The quiet tension of an audience realizing they were watching something real unfold. But Jessica still wasn't backing down. She smiled, not out of warmth, but like a chess player who thought she had just cornered her opponent. "That's an interesting perspective," she said, voice smooth as glass. "But let's address another factor, perception." She turned slightly, facing the cameras. "Marcus, you present yourself as a self-made success. But let's talk about how the media portrays black entrepreneurs. Some argue that the struggle to success narrative is more marketable than the thousands of white business owners who work just as hard. But don't get the same headlines." Marcus let out a quiet chuckle. "Oh. So now we get too much attention?" Jessica kept her polished smile, but her posture shifted, just slightly. She hadn't expected him to laugh. "You're telling me," Marcus continued, "that in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where major tech funding overwhelmingly goes to white-owned startups, the real issue is that people like me get too much press?" Jessica tucked her hair behind her ear again. A tell. She was losing ground, and she knew it. Marcus leaned back, eyes locked on hers. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was war. The atmosphere in the studio had changed. Tension crackled in the air. The audience wasn't just watching an interview anymore, they were witnessing a battle. Jessica Monroe, ever the professional, wasn't about to lose control. She had spent years perfecting her ability to dismantle guests with a smile. If Marcus thought he had taken command of the narrative, he was mistaken. She straightened slightly, her tone shifting to something colder, more surgical. "Let's take a step back, Marcus." Her voice was measured, deliberate. "You say the playing field isn't level. But let's be honest, if the system was truly against you, how did you get here?" Marcus exhaled through his nose. "Ah. Here it was. The "you made it, so things can't be that bad" argument. He knew this play. It was the equivalent of pointing to the one person who made it out of a burning building and saying, "See? The fire wasn't that bad." Marcus locked eyes with her, his voice steady. "You're right, Jessica. I did make it. But let's not pretend that my story proves the system is fair. All it proves is that I had to be exceptional to get here." Jessica's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She sensed what was coming, but there was no stopping it now. "You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about fairness." Marcus leaned in just enough for the cameras to catch the intensity in his eyes. "A mediocre white man can fail upwards in this country. He can run a company into the ground, bankrupt it, lay off thousands of employees. And somehow, he'll still get hired somewhere else." Jessica's lips parted slightly. She wasn't expecting that. Marcus wasn't finished. "Meanwhile, a black CEO has one bad quarter, and suddenly it's proof that we weren't ready for leadership." The silence was deafening. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged nervous glances. Jessica cleared her throat, shifting in her seat as if trying to regain balance. She needed to turn this around, fast. "Marcus," she said, forcing a light chuckle, "surely you're not suggesting that race plays a bigger role than merit in business?" Marcus tilted his head. "I'm saying people love to believe in fairy tales when they're the ones benefiting from them." Another ripple of silence washed over the studio. Even Jessica, the master of composure, blinked at that one. But she wasn't done. She couldn't be. She still had one final card to play. Jessica took a slow breath, then leaned forward, her expression shifting. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a reckoning. Jessica Monroe adjusted in her seat, her posture shifting in a way only a trained observer would notice. A slight recalibration. She was preparing for the final act, the moment designed to break him. She glanced down at her cue cards, then, deliberately, set them aside. This next part? She wanted to deliver directly. "Marcus," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this. And I respect that." A calculated pause. "But let me ask you something." Marcus gave a slow nod, waiting. Jessica's voice softened just a little, but the words she spoke carried a weight designed to crush. "Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated?" She let the words hang. "After all, your success proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim." There it was. The audacity. The casual dismissal wrapped in false diplomacy. The implication that his own success invalidated every struggle, every barrier, every statistic that proved the playing field was never even to begin with. Marcus felt the heat creeping up his spine, not anger, but something deeper. Something colder. He could hear Vanessa's warning from earlier that morning. "They don't invite you on these shows to celebrate you, Marcus. They invite you to use you. For a brief second, he considered his options. He could keep it safe. Play the media game. Say something neutral and walk away unscathed. Or, he could do something that no one in this room was prepared for. Marcus let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. And then, he looked straight into the camera. "You know," he said, his voice measured, calm, "it's funny how people love to use one success story to erase an entire problem." Jessica's smile stayed frozen in place, but something in her eyes flickered. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. "Let me put it this way." A pause. "If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, 'See? The fire wasn't that bad?'" Jessica opened her mouth, then hesitated. Marcus wasn't done. "The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought twice as hard to get through it." The weight of his words sank into the room like a stone thrown into deep water. Even the studio crew, the camera operators, the producers, the assistants, had stopped moving. Jessica adjusted in her seat, reaching for a controlled response, something that would put her back in command. But Marcus had one final shot left to fire. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "You want to talk about fairness?" He let out a soft, almost bitter chuckle. "Then let's start by telling the truth." And just like that, the entire country was watching. For a moment, the entire studio was frozen. Jessica Monroe, always the picture of composure, sat completely still. The control room, normally buzzing with whispered cues and quick camera changes, was dead silent. Everyone knew. They had just broadcasted something that would send shockwaves through the country. Jessica cleared her throat, trying to regain her footing. This was her show, her stage, she couldn't lose control now. She turned slightly toward the cameras, shifting into damage control mode. "Marcus," she began, her voice adopting that carefully neutral tone, "some might say your frustration isn't really about race. That it's about resentment toward larger corporations. After all, you've publicly criticized big tech companies for not hiring more diverse executives." Marcus didn't blink. He could feel it now, the shift in power. Jessica was no longer in control. Resentment? He let the word roll off his tongue, shaking his head. "No. Accountability? Absolutely." Jessica pressed her lips together for just a second, a subtle tell, but the camera caught it. She tried again. One last attempt to spin the narrative. "Then what do you say to those who believe that in today's economy, success is based on hard work, not race?" Marcus exhaled through his nose. And then, he delivered the final blow. "I say people love to believe in fairy tales. When they're the ones benefiting from them." A ripple of silence washed over the set. The kind of silence that sticks. The kind that can't be edited out. Jessica opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Marcus kept going. "Let's be real." His voice was steady, firm, but not angry. "Black entrepreneurs still get denied loans at twice the rate of white business owners. We still receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. And even when we prove ourselves, we still get asked whether we deserved our success." He let it sink in. Jessica sat still, listening, but not necessarily hearing. "So let's stop pretending this system isn't rigged." Another silence. Not the discomfort from earlier. This silence was different. It was impact. Jessica shifted slightly, adjusting in her chair. She was uncomfortable. And for the first time in her own studio, on her own show, she wasn't the one in control. The control room was in chaos. A producer's voice crackled over the studio speakers. "All right, we need to take a quick break." Jessica forced a polite smile. "We'll be back with more after this." The cameras cut. But the damage? The damage was done. 30 minutes later, the aftershock. By the time Marcus reached his car, his phone was blowing up. Texts. Missed calls. Notifications flooding his screen. And then, he checked Twitter. It was already trending. Hashtag Marcus Carter was right. Hashtag truth hurts. The clips had hit social media like a wrecking ball. Marcus Carter just exposed the media's bias on live TV. This was powerful. The way he looked straight into the camera and called out America. Chills. He dismantled her argument in real time. Legendary. But then, there were the others. Here we go again. Another successful guy pretending to be oppressed. Cry me a river. This guy just proved why people don't like hiring activists. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Cable news picked it up within the hour. CNN, Marcus Carter's viral moment, a reckoning for America's meritocracy. Fox News, is Marcus Carter the new face of corporate entitlement? Business Insider, What Marcus Carter's interview reveals about race and success in America. Meanwhile, Jessica Monroe was already in damage control mode. The next morning, on her show, she delivered a carefully rehearsed response. "I respect Mr. Carter and his accomplishments. But I stand by my questions. My job as a journalist is to ask what the audience is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were." Translation? She wasn't backing down. Marcus sat in his office, watching the broadcast from his laptop. Vanessa sat across from him, scrolling through emails. She sighed. "You know, we just got a flood of new investor inquiries." Marcus smirked. "Let me guess. The same people who ignored us last year?" Vanessa shrugged. "Guess being controversial is good for business. But not everything was positive. Some clients pulled out. A major corporate partner suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitments. And then came the threats. Emails. Phone calls. An unmarked package left outside Nextech's headquarters. Inside, a single sheet of paper with one word written in bold. Enough." Vanessa frowned as she read the note. "You need security." Marcus let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He knew this would come. Because every time a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically, this is the cost. The question now was, would he let the backlash silence him? Or was this just the beginning? The morning after the interview, Marcus Carter woke up to chaos. His phone was vibrating non-stop. Calls. Emails. Texts. His social media had exploded overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments. His name wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. But not all of it was praise. The media turns on him. By noon, major networks had shifted the narrative. Fox News, Marcus Carter's dangerous rhetoric. Does he really want equality or special treatment? Business Insider, did Carter just end his own career? The fallout of his controversial interview. Financial Times, Nextech's CEO faces investor scrutiny after fiery exchange on national TV. The same news outlets that had ignored Nextech for years were now picking apart every piece of his success. His college records, his past interviews, even his tweets from a decade ago. They were looking for something. Anything. A reason to discredit him. The corporate fallout. By mid-afternoon, Vanessa stormed into his office, her phone pressed against her ear. 2 more clients just pulled out. She dropped her phone on his desk. What the hell is happening? Marcus rubbed his temples. He already knew the answer. Big companies don't like controversy. They like control. And Marcus Carter? Right now, he was uncontrollable. Then, his office line rang. Private number. Marcus hesitated, then answered. A smooth, unfamiliar voice came through the receiver. A lawyer. "Mr. Carter. I represent several prominent investors. We need to talk. The offer, a quiet exit or total destruction." 30 minutes later, Marcus sat in a sleek, downtown conference room. Across from him were 3 men in expensive suits. Power brokers. The kind who moved unseen but controlled everything. One of them leaned forward. "We're here to offer you a way out, Mr. Carter." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A way out of what?" The man smiled, not friendly, but calculated. "This situation. We're willing to step in, absorb Nextech under a larger parent company. Keep it running. Keep your name attached. You walk away with a generous settlement. Say, $100 million. Vanessa, seated beside him, stiffened. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He saw it now. This wasn't a deal. It was a silencing. A way to erase him. "And if I say no?" Marcus asked. The man across from him smiled again, this time without warmth. "Then this gets worse for you. Much worse." Marcus exhaled slowly. They weren't just threatening his business. They were threatening everything. His name. His career. His legacy. Everything he had built from nothing. Vanessa glanced at him, eyes wide. This was the moment. The moment most people fold. Because the system wasn't designed to defeat men like Marcus. It was designed to make them quit. Marcus looked at the men in suits. Looked at the check they were ready to slide across the table. Then, he smiled. And shoved the check back toward them. "You don't own me." The room went silent. The man in the middle's face darkened. "Then I hope you're ready for what's coming next." Marcus stood. "So do I." And with that, he walked out. The warning, "This won't end well for you." That night, back at Nextech's headquarters, Vanessa paced the office, furious. "Are you crazy?" she demanded. "They were offering you a way out, Marcus. You could have walked away." Marcus sat at his desk, watching the city lights. "And then what?" He gestured out the window. "Let them erase me?" Let them own everything I built? Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. You're making enemies that don't lose, Marcus. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. A new email. No subject. No sender name. He clicked it open. Inside was one single image. A photo of his childhood home. And underneath it, 2 words. Walk away. Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't business anymore. This was war. Marcus Carter stared at the email on his screen, the image of his childhood home staring back at him. The 2 words beneath it, walk away, weren't just a warning. They were a promise. Vanessa saw his expression shift. Marcus. What is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his laptop around. Vanessa's face went pale. This isn't about Nextech anymore, she whispered. This is personal. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had expected backlash, business losses, media hit jobs. But this? Threats against his past, his life, the people he cared about? This was something else entirely. He had 2 options. Step back. Take the money. Let the system win. Push forward. Call them out. Expose everything. Most people would walk away. Marcus? He had never been most people. The special broadcast, controlling the narrative. The next morning, Vanessa stormed into his office, throwing a folder onto his desk. You're not gonna believe this. Marcus flipped it open. A major news network wanted him to do a 1-hour primetime special. They want a sit-down conversation. No interruptions. No edits. Vanessa crossed her arms. They're giving you a chance to tell your side of the story. Marcus closed the folder. No. They're giving me a chance to clean up their mess. Because that's how the system worked. First, they tear you down. Then, when the controversy becomes too big, they act like they were always fair. And when you go on their stage, they control the rules. Not this time. Marcus grabbed a pen and crossed out half the terms in the contract. I'll do it, he said. But on my terms. The moment the world stopped. 3 nights later, the country watched. A stage. A camera. 1 chair. No journalists. No panel. Just Marcus Carter, staring directly into the lens. He began simply. I wasn't supposed to make it here. Then, he told the truth. About the barriers, the betrayals, the threats. About how success in America wasn't just about hard work, but about access. About who gets opportunities. And who gets questioned. And then, at the very end, he did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the email, the image of his childhood home, the warning, and held it up for the world to see. You wanted me to walk away? He looked straight into the camera. I'm just getting started. The world went silent. And then, it erupted. The aftermath, a new war begins. The special aired for 90 minutes, and by morning, it had 50 million views. Some called him a hero. Others called him reckless. But no one could ignore him anymore. Nextech's investors rushed back, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Because now, Marcus Carter was bigger than his company. He was a movement. And the people who had tried to erase him? They had just made him untouchable. The final choice, the end or the beginning? A week later, Marcus stood in his office, staring out at the skyline. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice, one of the men from the offer meeting. You should have taken the deal, Marcus. Marcus smirked. You should have never sent that email. A beat of silence. Then, the call disconnected. Marcus set the phone down. Vanessa walked in. What now? He turned to face her, and smiled. Now? We rewrite the rules. Fade to black. The real-world lesson from Marcus Carter's story. Marcus Carter's journey isn't just a fictionalized drama, it's a reflection of reality for many ambitious individuals who challenge the status quo. His battle against bias, corporate control, and systemic barriers mirrors the struggles faced by countless entrepreneurs, professionals, and change-makers today. Key takeaways for real life. Success doesn't mean the system is fair. Just because you've made it doesn't mean the playing field is even. Many have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Don't let anyone dismiss real struggles just because a few people break through. Control your narrative. Marcus refused to let the media define him. In today's world of social media and misinformation, your voice is your power. Don't let others twist your story, own it. Expect resistance when challenging power, whether in business, activism, or life. The moment you challenge a system, it will push back. Expect opposition, but don't fold. Courage is expensive, but necessary. Speaking out has a price. But silence costs even more. Stand firm, even when it's uncomfortable. Rewrite the rules. If the system is rigged, stop playing their game. Build your own, change the conversation, and make them listen. In a world designed to keep certain people out, the boldest move is refusing to step aside.